This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, episode number 197. Hello, Timothy.
Yes. Hi. I'm speaking from my studio right now, so it's a little more echoey than being on the mic, but
Nobody
it's so
cares.
beautiful out. I got the ocean behind me. It's sunny, so that's where I want to be right now.
Yeah, well, where I want to be is in 2 hours on my way to JFK to go do my suicide tribute in the EU. Hello, and yes, I
Oh,
will.
cool. All right. Are you flying what, to Paris?
Flying to Paris, playing in Lille, Bourges, Marseille, and Bucharest. Yes.
All right.
It'll be
Lille.
fun.
You're going to Lille. That's a hard drinking fun town.
Whatever. I'm just
Good
going to do what I
response.
Yeah, I'm going to do what I do. Anyway, as a budding scientific researcher, my fellow scientists from the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, where I love Lausanne, Switzerland, have accidentally discovered a new material that can remember like a brain. Now, the
I'm
discovery of this material could have significant, obviously, implications in the development of new types of computers and
Does it a fiber?
artificial intelligence, and it can more closely mimic the capabilities of a human brain. Yeah, so the new material is made from vanadium dioxide, a compound that has already been extensively studied for its unique properties. However, the team in Lausanne discovered that when the vanadium dioxide is used to create tiny electrical circuits, it exhibits a remarkable ability to remember past events, similar to the way the brain works. So the researchers found that the material can retain a state of electrical conductivity even after the current has been shut off. I guess it's the same way I can feel electricity even when it's not
Maybe
plugged
it
in.
is. Maybe it
I know.
is.
So it is. So the material can effectively remember its electrical state before, which is a crucial characteristic for developing advanced computing systems that can adapt and learn like the human brain. Now, what scares me is this.
What?
We've just had, this is terrifying. A AI robot kills itself after being put under 15 minutes of wage slavery. Now, we know
Whoa.
robots are coming into play in many different things. I mean, I think it's something to invest in. I'm just
Well,
saying. But
everyone's freaking out about, just AI in general, and here it is, and not just AI, those RoboCop dogs that are going to be
yeah,
released in Times Square, and they used one of them yesterday to deal with that collapsed garage. So the future
yeah,
is here, folks.
yeah. Well, so it artificial intelligence robot, after 15 minutes of wage slavery or household chores, just decided, it's not the first time, to commit suicide.
Well, that
It was just like, and it's amazing that more women or low wage workers don't, but understandable. Couldn't take
well,
it.
maybe AI is more rational than humans.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is that it turns out is the rational thing to do. That if you were caught in that kind of wage slavery or working a sweatshop, just kill yourself.
Well, the issue is, I mean, humans, for whatever particular perverse reason, decide to kill innocent victims who are often slave wage labor workers or students in an act of absolute defiance against the laws of anything natural. Just saying. Anyway.
Speaking of AI, did you hear about this Jennifer Destano? Anyhow, she gets a call from these alleged kidnappers. They want $1 million. They go, "We got your daughter." They put the daughter on the phone. She's like freaking out. Well, it turns out it was an AI synthesis of her voice, and it sounded just like her daughter. And it was actually a robot posing as her daughter. And well, she almost had a heart attack. And she hung up the phone and just had a hunch to call her daughter. She's like, "Yeah, I'm at like the mall with my friends." What are you talking about?
Well,
But we've just begun. We've just begun.
it's yeah. I mean, sci-fi was always ahead of the times, and a lot of it is just obviously about.
Well, the thing about sci-fi being ahead of its time, it's not like this premonition. It's actually because it's science fiction. Someone came up with the idea, and then of course there's just engineers like, "Hey, let's make that."
And actually,
Well,
it's actually doing a pretty good job trading stocks too. I was reading a thing that it was able to.
I heard this.
It was
Yeah.
able to parse the latest Fed report and made really good decisions on what stocks you should buy.
Well, let's face facts. Probably AI could do a better job in politics than what we're seeing right about now. Now, let's read
You
out
could have
something.
Chat GPT as a guest.
Yeah, that'd be funny. Two chatbots in a presidential debate.
Hey, as a fembot, no biggie. Going back to something a little bit more primitive.
Sure.
New Delhi, an Indian couple died by suicide by using a guillotine-like mechanism to decapitate both of themselves in a sacrificial ritual, police have reported.
Whoa.
So
Whoa.
Hanubai Makawana, 38, and his wife Hansaban, 35, both died by decapitation after using a homemade bladed mechanism in
Old school.
on their farm in the western state of Gujarat. Now, they prepared first a fire altar before putting their heads under a guillotine, which was held by a rope. And as soon as they released the rope, the iron blade fell on them, severing their heads, which rolled into the fire. And fire is considered a sacred element in Hinduism and plays a significant role in several worship rituals. So they apparently designed this device used in their beheading in such a way that their heads would roll right into the fire altar.
Oh boy, well engineered.
Completing the act. So they did find a suicide note addressed to the family. They're launching an investigation, but ritual human sacrifices are not unknown in India, where official data show that there were more than only 100 reported cases. Not very much. When America does human sacrifice, it's the sacrifice of other people they often don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know what to say about that one.
There's not much to say.
Not to say. I mean, what did you think about this Fox settlement for $787.5 million? They had to do it because actually that's cheaper than exposing all their main people, their main actors up there saying like, "Yep, I'm just totally full of shit." I mean, that would actually totally kill their brand.
I mean, the UK has known that people like Rupert Murdoch and Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
Yeah.
The corruption has obvious forever. And, finally they have to admit, but they paid it off without going to
hush money.
They don't want to have to admit. There's, oh yeah, here we go. But what's good is Dominion voting systems are not done. Now they're going after all the other fucking minor assholes.
Well, no.
But Powell, Mr. Pillow.
They're not done, but they're also not the only voting system company that's going after Fox. There's another one that's going to sue them for $2.5 billion. So, I mean, cat's out of the bag. They're gonna have to continue to pay people off. I mean, it's just so like Tucker Carlson doesn't go on the stand.
What? Stop fucking lying. I mean, eventually they should be fined or imprisoned for their fucking lies, and it is about goddamn time. Now, on the subject that might make you a little bit happier, I don't know if you heard about this as the animal lover you are. What about the new species of jellyfish with 24 eyes that are separated into 6 groups around the bell of the jellyfish? This was discovered in a muddy pond in Hong Kong. And the new species is part of the box jellyfish family, transparent body measuring less than 1 inch and 3-inch long tentacles.
Is it venomous?
Yes.
Is it venomous? Because the box jellyfish down in Australia and like Indonesia, that thing is super venomous and deadly. So is this one venomous?
Well, it is indeed venomous. And the thing is, it's so freaking tiny. And it's the first discovery of a new box jellyfish species in Chinese waters. And the fourth species in the same family, the most venomous marine animals in tropical waters. I mean, these things are so tiny that it's, I don't even know how they counted 24 eyes.
Well, what the most venomous thing in the waters though is that little mini octopus that like bites you, like you just die immediately.
True that.
So okay, so we've had we're having like mass shootings every day, but what about this thing about Andrew Lester, the 85-year-old geezer that fucking shot that kid, Ralph, just like ringing his doorbell.
Well, I mean, that's not the only case. I mean, there was also like two cheerleaders. They got in the wrong car. There was a woman pulling in the wrong driveway. What the fuck?
Upstate New York. She drove, and then she was like, "Oh, I'm in the wrong place." Turned around, and the guy like fucking. I guess he has good aim. He was on his porch, like maybe 200 yards away, and just shot her in the back of the truck. You know, I don't know. I think I mentioned in the podcast, but you know, this happening when I was on tour in Texas, like about a month ago. We after our show, not with you, but with someone else, Rick Odd.
You told us, yes.
Yeah, he got the wrong address, and the guy came out with a fucking gun, and boy, was that a close one. So I mean, this is the new norm. It's someone just knocks at the door, you're just waiting.
I mean, all of this nonsense, all of the lies, all of the firearms, all of the shootings, it's all fear-based, which is pathetic. Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. It's like fear of other, fear of someone, fear of whatever. I mean, this is what's so ridiculous. And it's like, you know what? If you don't trust yourself, you're not going to trust anybody else.
But I'm asking, Lydia, are these people just sitting alone at their home all day, just with a gun in their hand, just like jittering and terrified? I don't get it.
Probably. I mean, you know, this is America after all. Now, this did not happen in America, and I knew you were kind of like, you were kind of curious if this was a true story or not, but I do believe the Lad Bible about the man who was swallowed by a hippo and ripped apart, who shares how he survived. So a man who survived being swallowed by a hippo has opened up about the incident. And the thing is, Paul Templar, face to face with an angry hippo, and he survived despite being swallowed 3 times. Now, he was working as a Zimbabwe tourist guide, and he'd been out in the water hundreds of times with travelers hoping to catch a glimpse of the area's wildlife. So, however, while out in a canoe near Victoria Falls, really beautiful.
Yeah, never been, but it's supposed to be.
Me either. Things went absolutely badly wrong. So Paul Templar says, I was out with 3 fellow guides and some tourists when we came across a group of hippos. They weren't too close by, and why I felt a bit of apprehension. I believe we were safe. However, suddenly I heard a huge splash and a crashing sound, and I saw that a hippo had bit one of the other canoes. The boat flipped out of the water into the hippo's back, and in doing so, my colleague was thrown into the water. Now, there were some rocks nearby, and I shouted to my nearest colleague, say, take everyone back there to safety. Then I went off to try and find the other guy. Well, while all of this was sinking in, things would quickly go from bad to much worse. So he was paddling over to his colleague, and he said, when I saw the hippo coming towards me underwater, now we know that they can swim about 30, they can run about 34 miles an hour.
They don't swim. They're just like solid cannonballs of muscle, and they run on the bottom of the floor. Of the
flesh, right. It was like a submarine torpedo as it made its way toward me. Suddenly, everything went dark and quiet, and it took a few seconds for me to realize what had happened. From the waist up, I felt that I wasn't really wet, but I wasn't really dry. I could feel a sort of pressure on my lower back. And with one of my arms, I could feel around, and I felt bristles. He then said he was inside a hippo. But rather than panic, he was weirdly relieved. So, quote, immediately went through my mind was, at least I know I'm not in a crocodile. And then the next thought was,
he discriminates which animals eat him? He prefers being eaten by a hippo?
The hippo began to shake me around while I was struggling to get away. Then the hippo spat me out. And as I made my way to the surface, I spotted the other guide who I had been trying to save, and we swam away. So they desperately attempted to get back to land, but the hippo came back and tried again, this time swallowing Paul Templar feet first. I've been swallowed up again, he said, and this time it really started thrashing me around. The best way I can describe it is like a dog tossing around a rag doll. I tried to reach for my gun, but it was throwing me around so much I wasn't able to reach it. So at the same time, he's trying desperately not to drown as the animal plunged him into the water, but miraculously, it spat him out again. Now, at this point, the hippo appeared to be determined. and Paul Templar remembers
Clearly.
it charged at him with his mouth open and he grabbed him by the torso. And he said it all seemed like it was in slow motion. I thought he was going to bite me in half, which they can. And then I saw my blood mixing with the water, and I remember thinking, will I bleed to death or will I drown? I felt very detached, like nothing I did would have any effect. But his ordeal was far from over, and his body was absolutely mangled from the attack, while his colleague sadly lost his life. So Paul's left arm was completely crushed. Blood poured from the various wounds up and down his body, one so deep his colleague told him that his lung was visible.
Oh
In
my
total,
God.
38 bite wounds. His
30.
quick thinking, 38 bite wounds. His quick thinking pal used some cling film from a tray of food that happened to be nearby, which Paul says stopped his lung from collapsing.
I don't understand something. A bite wound from a hippo is basically like a giant pole going through your
Well,
body.
no.
It's not like
No,
little
they
shark
have-
teeth. It's like
No,
wham.
they have tons of teeth. They have tons of teeth, but their canines are like two samurai swords.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the thing is, if you need to know more, and Tim, you probably do, you can order his book called What's Left of Me by Paul Templar.
I mean, that's funny. It's still hard to believe. Or he just happens to be lucky that he got attacked by a bulimic hippo, because
I think that the thrashing is what saved him. Like if the hippo would have just been there chomping away, probably would have been bitten in half. But I think the thrashing might have been what saved him. Don't know. Just saying.
Well, maybe someone should send him a gift of the game Hungry Hungry Hippos, just to kind of just to deal with his PTSD. Cool story, though.
I mean, that's about all I know today.
I have one story. A armored truck driver in Philly. I don't know why he was even allowed to do this, but he was doing. He had a big drive to Florida, but he decided he wanted to sleep. Maybe he parked it in like a Walmart parking lot. Well, leaving the mint. He woke up and saw the armored truck got broken into. I think that would be hard, but someone did, and they basically ran off with $200,000 in dimes. And I mean, I don't know if anyone here has carried like a sack of coins, but like,
what the hell are you gonna do with
$200,000 dimes? That's heavy as fuck. And I don't know how they're gonna track that. I mean, I'm sure they have some kind of serial system to kind of track that.
Well, the thing
down,
is, not the tracking isn't the issue. The issue is how long is it going to take you to get rid of those fucking things?
Exactly. I don't know how that's going to work, but that's pretty hilarious.
Well.
A dime heist.
Well, I try to stay away from nickel and diamond shit, but that's just the way it is. I don't go for the chump change if I can avoid it. Anyway, this is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and our special guest today, master of mastering and mixing, Nick Launay. Lots of things to his credit. Can't wait to talk to him. And there we go. Episode number 197. Yes. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Nick Launay, producer of many exciting things ever since he was just a wee teenage boy in the UK. Hi, Nick.
Before I was even born, in fact.
What were you producing in the womb?
I've got a good answer to that one.
Please.
It would have to be Mark Boland, wouldn't it? Because he came dancing out of the womb. So that would be
good
my
one.
answer to that one.
But aren't the white noise machines supposed to simulate like the womb kind of drone that makes people feel so comfortable and they just want to kind of knock out? I mean, I've heard that. I don't know if it's true, but
I want to knock somebody out when I hear the sounds of somebody else's womb. I don't know if I really meant that.
I don't know what that means. I don't know.
The natural born killer and all that crap. How is it in sunny LA, Nick?
Well, it is actually sunny, which is amazing because when you were here only, it feels like yesterday, but yeah, it was raining, wasn't it? It was a lot of rain and cold. Now it looks like LA. It's very bright, and I don't know quite what I'm doing awake
It
at this
might be
time.
warmer in Brooklyn than it is in LA today. We're already having like a faux summer.
Yeah,
Nice.
it's gonna be 80 the next couple of days, and then it's gonna go back to the 50s next week. But enough about that. Let's talk
So
about
what's going
let's talk-
what's
yeah,
what's going on right now with you? What's your latest musical scandals that you're working on before we have a big fat history lesson of all that you have done? And let's hear what you are
Well,
doing.
I am actually, this is kind of an interesting one. Back in the 80s, I can't remember which year exactly, mid 80s, I did a song with a special song with Michael Hutchence, which was a solo. It wasn't, obviously he's the singer from In Excess, and I did an album with In Excess with him. But we carried on and we did a song called Rooms for the Memory, which was for a film directed by Richard Lowenstein. And he, as you know, did some great documentaries about people. And so I'm just redoing it because it was written by Ollie Olsen, who, did you know Ollie Olsen, Lydia?
I mean, I don't really know him, no. I mean,
But
considering how many times I went to Australia and all my Australian friends, no, I didn't really know him.
he's a lovely guy. He's okay. He's not well, but he's doing okay. And anyway, it's to raise money for him. And so there's actually a new version of Rooms for the Memory by Adelita from Magic Dirt. They're a great band. They're like the Sonic Youth of Australia. And they're a 90s band. She's a great singer. So she's done a version, and I've just remixed the original version.
the Michael Hutchence. And is this coming out because of the new Paula Yates little documentary series that came out?
No, I don't know about that actually.
Oh yeah, people like it. I haven't checked it out, but
I'm sure it's great.
Was he having an affair with her when you were mixing this record?
He married Paula Yates
Eventually, but first, yeah. But at that time, I think she was still married to Bob Geldof, and it was a big controversy.
Yes. Big controversy.
Big controversy.
Michael is a big controversy.
Well, I talked to you about this, and I don't know if you remember. I heard the rumor was, because the whole autoerotic asphyxiation thing is just a bunch of bullshit. I heard, and that he had a just a bike accident in London, had a head injury, and then just like when people have head traumas, this happens sometimes. He committed suicide just like a month later or something. I don't know if that's true.
No, well, close. He did have a bike accident. There's two stories. One, he had a bike accident, as in fell off a bike and hit his head on the pavement.
Right.
Number two is he got some bouncer at a club.
Ooh.
Hit him. He fell over and hit the curb. But either way, he hit the curb. Very sadly, he lost his sense of taste and smell.
Yeah, that happens
too. And he was in a coma for a while, then came out. And but there's no doubt that losing one of your senses, or two of them like that, leads to depression. So he was on antidepressants, and I think that ended up leading to a lot of things. But it took years and years. I mean, it was a long time from when the accident happened and to think. But you know what? The best thing, if anybody's interested out there, or those of you interested, is to go and watch a film called Mystify. It's a fantastic documentary about Michael, and it's. I mean, Michael's one of the coolest people I've ever encountered. He's just an extraordinary guy. And but anyway, this song, Rooms for the Memory, is what is, I think, one of the coolest things he ever did. So I was more than happy.
And so when does that, when and where and how does that hit?
Well, I don't know, because it's being organized by friends of his in Melbourne. I believe it comes out in the next month, and it's a charity thing. But it's such a good song. I'll send it to you so you can hear it. It's quite the lyrics are great, and it's a lot darker stuff than In Excess.
We can list it on here because musicians, most don't have any kind of health care and will face numerous types of ailments in the history of their lives, as we all know.
But even an accident like hitting your head, I mean, this I know someone that happened in Berlin last year and was in a coma for, just little things can just, redirect your life dramatically. And
Well, and
yeah,
also
not having health insurance. Yeah.
I mean, they used to advertise when they, were advertising antidepressants before all these other drugs were advertised on TV, that it could lead to suicide. Thanks. So just make the situation worse because it's there's so many kinds of antidepressants. They don't all work for everybody. They don't always work at once. They don't necessarily solve the problem. So it's just really it's so confusing and it can be so toxic.
Yeah, and especially I think back then in the early 90s, they knew so little about all this. Anyway.
Yes. Well,
yes.
Let's go. So, were you a happy child, or were you kind of?
I was a very happy child.
Okay, so you just dove in.
I still am a happy child.
Yeah, cool answer.
Let's start at the beginning of your very happy childhood. When did you get to London, or where were you when you first started producing? We're going to go into the history of that because it's so fascinating. So, teenage years. Tell us about it.
Well, I grew up. See, my parents were a bit adventurous. They were very adventurous. They were both, they're mostly French blood, but from England, let's say. And they had enough of England when I was 8 years old, and they moved to the south of Spain. So I actually grew up in Spanish, all Spanish friends, went to Spanish school, and I grew up in a little village called Frigiliana, which is halfway up a mountain. And it had originally, when my parents moved there, it had no water or electricity in the houses and no road to it. So that's how crazy they were. But
that teaches the basics of life, though. Yeah. That teaches you how to get on with it, doesn't it?
It does. So I was up there amongst the mules and donkeys and
did you have a donkey as a pet?
No. I had many dogs and cats, but no donkeys. But there were donkeys around. There was.
I love donkeys. Yeah.
Yeah, and goats. Many goats.
Humble animals.
They're not
what people
bad.
don't realize is that there are so many. Now that wasn't a ghost town that you lived in, but there are. When I first went to Spain, I was interested in the ghost towns, especially Belchite. But I thought there were 300, but there could be 3,000. And a ghost town can only be 4 buildings or 40.
That's right.
But there were villages like you lived in that had no roads, had no water, had no electricity, and eventually people just got out.
Well, there was a ghost town, a ghost village, about right next to the village that I grew up in was Frigiliana, and there was another one, and it just simply they ran out of money to look after it. They just couldn't live there because there was nothing there. So but it's still like that. It's still there.
Turning a lot of them into rural Airbnbs, which is beautiful because I mean, Spain is so beautiful. I mean, whether it's a ghost town or the inner cities, I love it. So you grew up there.
So I grew up there, and I could go into all that, but
any electricity?
Yes, eventually we got electricity, thank God, because we needed the electricity to run the record player, to influence me with rock and roll. So my mum was as rock and roll as it gets, really. She just played loud music all day long, very late at night, and my dad was more into classical music and theater. He was a theater guy. He was a writer, so he wrote plays for theater. But there was a lot of rock and roll, and a lot of Americans came to live in our house. We had a soap factory that my parents put a roof on, big building, and lots of American friends were hovering around, and they stayed and painted and wrote poetry and all this stuff. But they had come from California over to Spain to get away from going to Vietnam. Well, the blokes had that. That's what happened. So I was surrounded by American people listening to basically loud rock and roll music. So I suppose that's where it started. And
your childhood was kind of like what people do in Europe for the summer vacation, only that went all year round for you.
Yes.
Right? Artists go off into a village.
Exactly.
Paint and write.
Did you go to a school? Were you homeschooled? What was going on?
I did go to a school. There was one classroom for the whole village.
All right.
For boys and girls from the age of 6 to 14, all in one class. And get this, our teacher was the mayor of the village, Frigiliana, and because he was the only educated man, you see. And what's more, he built this new classroom on the side of a mountain. If you imagine a mountainside, and it goes up and then it goes down to a river, right, on the other side. So there's a village on this side, the river on the other side. Now, the wealthiest people in Friciliana at the time had goats. That was their thing. They had a goat because that, you know, that was their income. They have the goat. So there were hundreds and hundreds of goats. Every morning, the goat herder in the village. I know you think I'm going off on a tangent, but I'm not.
No, because
I'm
I've
I'm
seen,
into this.
I've seen this. I've seen the goat herders in Belchite led by a donkey.
Right. And they have a whistle that goes
or a bell, or a
Right.
bell.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
the
so they do that at
the
6 a.m.
gathering of the goats,
And the
it's-
goats, the people who have goats, those wealthy enough for a goat, have their goat in the house. So they throw the goat outside to the street. Well, not throw, but, you know, push. And hundreds of goats go along this little street all the way up to go over the hill to go and drink water and be in the shade and eat grass, right? However, this school teacher, who was the mayor, built a new classroom right on the edge of this hill. So the goats could no longer get to the river. The only way they could do it was to go round the classroom, and then they got lost because the goat herder couldn't climb round there.
right.
So the solution was to put another door at the other side of our classroom. So you had the main door and the other door. So at 6 p.m., bear in mind in school in Spain, you know, they have the siesta. So you're there till 7 p.m. 6 p.m., the goats would come back and you'd hear this little and this scratching at the door. You'd open it up and 100 goats would go through my classroom every day. That was my education.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, could you get away with, like, you could say, like, the goat ate my homework? Is that what?
Well, you could.
Is that what the
And you'd
excuse
be-
was? Probably
and
would, right?
It would, and it would actually be believed. But if you were a bad person, or if you were naughty and sent to the corner, when the goats had gone through,
You'd have to
and
clean their poo.
yes, you'd have to sweep up their
Oh,
poo.
my God.
Yeah.
How did I know?
Yes. You've been there, I can tell.
So,
Well, I can only imagine.
did you ever get substitute teachers in a school like this? Like, someone gets
Nope.
sick, like, who is this other person that came in? Oh, okay.
So how long did that idyllic childhood last before?
8 years. 8 years of it. 8 years of donkey poo. No, well, no, actually 2 years up at that school and then went down to another town called Nerja, which was a bit more civilized. It had 2 schools and electricity and water. And anyway, 1976, right? When I was 16, Franco, the dictator of Spain, died. And so he was a fascist chap. And although, you know, it was probably good that he died because he wasn't a very nice person.
Not that, yeah, depends who you talk to in Spain.
Well,
Hideous
yeah.
motherfucker.
Yeah. What did happen is, as soon as he was gone, they got their shit together with the law, and we didn't have a permit to live there.
Oh, okay.
So we were kicked out. Me and my mum, my brother, we were all kicked out. So we had to go back to England. So, which was good because it was 76 and punk rock was starting, and I was 16. So
Did you,
I went-
before you hit London at 16,
Yeah.
did you even know what was going on? How could you? You're in a village.
No. Oh, the only thing I knew about England, well, when I was around 12, I started collecting records, and I'd go. My dad moved back. My parents split up when I was about 12, reasonably amicably, I think. I think they were both having affairs, you know, because it was flower
one
power
should.
time, flower power, and all that stuff. But he went back, and so me and my brother would fly to London, and I'd just buy vinyl all the time. And I bought a lot of, so my early things I bought was glam rock, so Sweet, you know, T-Rex, obviously Bowie, all that stuff. And then when we moved back to England, I mean, you know, obviously I was watching a lot of TV, and then the Sex Pistols appeared, and that whole interview happened, and I was already going to gigs almost every night because it was very cheap to go out back then, and I had a skateboard, so I was just a teenager on a skateboard with spiky hair, and me and my brother were both punks, and I think we're in a couple
immediate punks
Immediately.
on a road.
Yeah.
And the thing is, in
immediate
76, 77, 78, there were gigs every night that you wanted to go to.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great timing.
What was one of the best shows you saw as like 16, 17-year-old in London during that period? Like what just really kicked you in the balls?
The Damned.
Okay.
I saw The Damned at the Marquee, and during one of the songs, Rat Scabies stopped playing drums, went over to the front of the stage and had a shit.
Oh.
And then went back. So that was very memorable.
Lucky you weren't naughty that day, or you would have had to clean it up.
I know. That's right.
So that
was memorable. But I really liked. I mean, I went to a lot of things. I loved Buzzcocks and the Stranglers. I remember going to, and Wire. Were probably.
I love Wire and Buzzcocks, two of my favorite bands from that period. A Magazine.
Yeah, Magazine. Well, yeah, Magazine. And I saw something. I saw the first time that Joy Division played. That was a very memorable big in London. That was incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah. And
all right. So, yes.
Well, and they were supporting Human League.
Oh, interesting. And
before Human League became the pop band.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a whole different lineup.
Yeah.
And
being boiled.
And would you argue that the real Human League's worse than the corporate Human League? I mean, sometimes it works like that. I think they might be, but that's the original guys went on to spent their advance on a Fairlight and formed Heaven 17, but that was something else. So how did were guitars what you were kind of like attracted to, or music concrete? I mean, because you were kind of splicing pretty early, right?
No, I never wanted to be a musician up on stage. I wasn't attracted to that. Basically, going back again to time in Spain, my dad wrote lots of books, novels, and he was a great storyteller. So they put him on the BBC reading his books sometimes, or doing interviews and stuff. So he had, because we lived in Spain, he had to send them recorded versions of himself, right? Okay. So he had a tape machine, a reel-to-reel tape machine. And eventually got a new one, and he gave me the old one, which was this God, I can't remember what it was called now. It'll come to me. But anyways, this very old 70s, actually probably made in the 60s, tape machine, reel to reel. So I messed around with that when I was about 11, 12 years old. And I ended up editing a lot of stuff, and I made tape loops, and I did a mashup, although it wasn't called mashup. But I did this thing where I took the Rolling Stones' "Sympathy for the Devil," and I put that onto the tape, recorded it onto the tape, and made a loop of just the intro. So it was just that bit. It
was a break. You made a break beat of the Rolling Stones, basically.
That's it. Well, I did that, but then this guy arrived from America with this amazing invention called the cassette machine.
Oh, yes.
Right. So then if you think about it, I had two recording devices. So then what I could do is I could record the loop onto the cassette machine and have a 7-minute or whatever long, and then I took Beatles record. And I noticed that the Beatles' early records had the vocals on one side and
hard
the
pan
on the other.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yes.
I took just one side, the vocals, and then I from the turntable just plugged the left side only back into the tape machine, and the cassette machine, I typed the right-hand side, plugged that in the tape machine. So basically got the vocals from Paperback Writer to play on top of the drum loop.
And they go out of phase. I mean, are they the same tempo?
No, I put coins on the turntable
Oh, old
to
school.
weigh it
Amazing.
down to make it, and
See,
it kept
when you
going
have all
out.
that, when you have all that time on your hands in a
Yes.
village,
Well,
and
the
you've only got
goats,
goats and donkeys,
goats and donkeys.
genius will arise.
I mean, there were books about music about music concrete, and of course all the new music of the 20th century, the classical, new music, classical guys doing all that stuff. Did you take any books out of the library and read about these techniques? Was this all
No.
trial and error?
No, it was all just fucking around.
Instinct.
Really.
Cool.
Instinct.
Cool.
I mean,
like
I
that.
loved electronics and cables and lights and all this stuff. That's what I was drawn to. So when I went to England, finally, we went, living back in England, I was going to all these gigs, but what I really wanted to do was make records. I really wanted to make records. That was it all about, right from, I mean, I wanted to do that since I was, I don't know, 13, 14. And then, there I was in a big city, and I heard about a recording studio. I mean, there's a long, wiggly road to getting to certain places, but basically, I got a job at a studio called Tape One, which was a mastering and editing room. It wasn't a recording studio, but I didn't know that. All I knew, it was a recording studio, so I got a job there when I was 17. And the first thing that kind of changed a lot of things for me was that I'd learned to edit properly. I had proper professional tape machines. I learned a lot of technical stuff, which is all very boring, but it was good to know that stuff. But this song came in to the place to be duplicated, because back then, this is way before digital. If a song was going to be released in various countries, you had to have many copies of it. And of course, there's only one master. So they send you the master and you copy it, and you do identical copies. So I knew how to do that. So I was doing this copy, and it was a song which I thought was just pretty amazing, because it was a disco song. It had a disco beat. It had synthesizers, a bit like sort of Kraftwerk, or Gary Newman. It sounded a bit like that. But the singer was an unknown singer, and it sounded a bit like Iggy Pop. So I thought, this is a really interesting record. It's a disco record with Iggy Pop singing and these synths. And there was a normal version and an instrumental version. And I thought, just for the fun of it, I would make my own version up. So I edited the copy. I did copies, and I edited between the instrumental and the vocal version, and then I put some backwards bits in. I made some tape. I was doing all this just for fun, and my boss came in at 1 a.m. and sort of like, what are you doing here still? And he was a great guy, so he wasn't annoyed at me. He was more impressed that I was there so late working. And I said, well, I'm doing this. I'm just having some fun. I'm having some fun with this song. This song came in. He said, oh, which song? And I said, oh, it's this song. And I'll reveal what it is in a minute. And he said, oh yeah, that's a great track. He said, that's the artist, the singer's name is Robin Scott. And he said, oh, the singer Robin Scott's coming in tomorrow. Do me a copy of it. I'll play it to him, because it's really good. And I was like, you can't do that. I've just butchered his song, So anyway, being my boss, I did do the copy. Next day, knock, knock, in walks the mastering guy, whose name is Dennis Blackham, and Robin Scott. And Robin was dressed in a beautiful blue suit. He looked a bit like Brian Ferry. This was an unknown artist right at the time. And he basically said he loved the version I did, and that he had been in New York with going to clubs and stuff. And he had seen that they were playing 12-inch records, but there was only one song on them. So there's basically a 12-inch single, but it was only for clubs, and it was to get more low end. And so he was really interested in this. And by the way, Robin Scott also managed the Slits, so he was a pretty cool bloke. But he decided to do a solo project. And so anyway, he said he wanted to put out the first ever commercial 12-inch single. So he needed a longer version of the song. And I'd done a longer version of the song.
Whoa.
So how about that?
Whoa. I mean,
The
that's
song came out, the single version, his version came out, and it went to #1 in England. And the
Holy
song was,
moly, right off the bat.
yeah, right off the bat, it was Pop Muzik. Do you know that song?
of
Pop
course I
Muzik?
do. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, pop, yeah,
Yeah, yes,
radio,
yes.
video,
Oh, yeah.
Boogie with a Suitcase. all that.
Steady rotation for a while. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. I mean, it's a cool song. So then my version came out, and it kept it at #1 for 7 weeks, which is
You must
kind of
have been
unheard of.
just amazed.
Yeah. So I was 17, and my name was on it. So that was the first thing I did. And amusingly enough, you know how Spotify don't credit record producers or engineers, and they're terrible at all this. If you type in Pop Muzik on Spotify, it says that I'm the artist, which is
Whoa. Well,
really
I mean,
it's kind of
bizarre.
true.
well, no, but you kind of are.
Kind of
Well,
true.
I don't know about that,
No, but hear me out. And this is gonna be a segue into the next thing, because you end up, and I don't want to cut out any of your history, but you end up at Townhouse and you're working with Hugh Padgham, and just like your editing and your curiosities with remixing and stuff, suddenly the automated SSL board's coming out, and I assume, did you work with that a lot? I mean, suddenly mixing
absolutely.
becomes a completely different art form, and it's kind of a game changer. So in a weird way, I mean, I guess you have the kind of auteur producer of, say, a Phil Spector and all those people in the past, but then now with this automation, it's a new generation of the
I mean,
producer being the artist.
Yeah, the automation thing that kicked in right when I moved there. I mean, it had been around, I think, in America on some desks for a bit before.
All right, so you're riding high on pop
yes.
music.
Yes.
And what that, I mean, your boss must have been impressed.
Yeah, and well, then that led to me kind of going, I really want to work in a recording studio where I record bands. And
now
my
you
boss,
had you had cachet at this point.
well, I went for an interview along with a lot of other teenagers at this new studio that Virgin, Richard Branson had built. It had just opened, and I'd heard about it. And basically, I went there for an interview to get a job as a tea boy and assistant engineer. And
I could use one of those
job.
around my house, although I don't drink tea. I'd love to have a tea boy. But
That's what we were called. Yeah.
Go ahead.
But yeah, so I went for the interview, and I did get the job there because the engineer, the chief engineer, found it really amusing, because I don't think I was very cocky, but I was quite cocky about, and I just said, look, I just want to get a job here so I can produce records, and I've got to do it, and I've got to make records, and the sooner I can get a job, the better. And he was like, well, you're going to be an assistant for years. You're not going to get to do a record of your own for years. And you got to be an assistant, then you've got to be an engineer, and he said, and what's your experience of this? And I said, well, I did do this song, and I bought a copy, and it had my name on it. So he was amused by that, and so I got the job. But yeah, and then it was a great recording studio because, well, I mean, just the bands that went there was, Queen were there.
It was the biggest studio, or the most well known of its generation, right? I mean, people.
One of them, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, Olympic and Air and Townhouse are probably.
All right, so hang on. So Queen is coming in. What are you doing? Queen's in. What are you doing? Did you even like Queen?
I did like Queen. I mean, I've always been into the darker side of music. There's no doubt about that. However, I did think Queen were great. And it was really funny.
They had balls.
It was fun because, and Freddie, what happened actually, this is how things go, right, is that I'd only been there a month, and the assistant engineer who was on the Queen session quit, right? Don't know why he quit, but he quit. And so as an emergency thing, like, he quit suddenly. I don't think anything bad happened, but so I got put on that session. I was really only like I said, a tea boy, as in bring tea. But so I ended up being an assistant on this Queen session when they were doing Flash Gordon.
Oh yeah,
You know,
that was loud in the theaters.
yeah.
Who is the main engineer for that? If you're the assistant,
Alan Douglas, a guy called Alan Douglas was the engineer, and so I'm on this session, and basically Freddie just kept coming over and sitting on my lap
oh boy,
while I was operating the tape machine with his arm around me.
Nice.
Like this, and he was kind of saying, "Oh, we need to do this. I want to do this," and he'd get up, but he kept coming back, and I dare say that was what put the other assistant off. I don't know. I think it was just that
Sensual harassment.
Yeah. Yes. So he was, you know, as flamboyant as you could ever expect Freddie to be. He's just fantastic. He was amazing.
I think I think the Queen documentary is great. I wasn't into them at the time, but after seeing the documentary on them, I was pretty much into it. Very stubborn in their ideas.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, I always love a raving lunatic hedonist.
Yes,
I mean, I
he
can't
definitely
resist
was.
him. Come on. I mean,
He was a raving lunatic, but you know, the studio was great because it had a lot of the Virgin signed bands would come in, and it had a lot of really, really big bands and really cool new bands. I mean, you know, Simple Minds were there a lot, you know, and Tom Verlaine was there all the time. He lived there. Tom Verlaine lived upstairs. So I knew Tom pretty well.
and that's where the famous gated snare came from, right? The famous.
Yes, that happened later, though.
That happened later. What year did?
See,
Okay.
He's jumping ahead. This man.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
He knows everything.
I'm sorry. I got excited. Gated explosive gated snares are funny.
I'll tell you this. So here's what happens. You see, is Public Image were booked in for a weekend, right? Because they were signed to Virgin, and nobody wanted to work on that session. None of the assistants. There were 3 or 4 other assistants who were a bit older than me. They didn't want to do it because John had been obnoxious to them, let's say. You know, and we don't know what to believe because I really don't believe it. I've always found John to be great. But anyway, so I got put on that session, and I couldn't believe my luck because I was a huge fan. I'd been to many gigs, and so it was just me and John turned up, and this engineer who's he was a reggae guy. He wasn't Jamaican. He had dreadlocks, but he was more of an English Jamaican. Nice guy, but he just didn't know how to operate the desk, you know, which was, as you pointed out, Tim, it was a prototype SSL B series. Yes, with that automation stuff. And so I knew a little bit. I didn't know much, but I knew a little bit about it. But this engineer really didn't know much, and he didn't really learn very quickly. So what ended up happening is I was at the back of the room operating the tape machine, which is where you was told to be. And you're also told don't speak till you're spoken to, kind of stuff going on with assistants there. So the engineer would be, you know, twiddling and trying to get something to work. And he'd say, "Hey, this button here doesn't work. There's something wrong." And so I'd get up from my chair and I'd go over and say, "No, you have to fiddle. You have to pull the knob up, and that's the switch. The switch engages when you pull the knob up. Otherwise, it won't work." He says, "All right, I got it." So anyway, he's twiddling some more. Then he gets to another channel and he goes, "Come on, this one doesn't work either." So I'd go up, and so this kept happening. And at some point, John turns to me and says, "Yeah, what's your name?" I said, "Nick." And he said, "Well, Nick, for fuck's sake, take your chair, put it up near the desk because you're going backwards and forwards like a fucking yo-yo and you're making me dizzy." So I took my chair and I sat next to the engineer, although I
didn't know what he was fucking doing.
Yeah. And every time he couldn't get it to work, I would do it. Eventually, this engineer got up to go and have a piss, left the room, and John got up and locked the door.
Oh, nice.
Yes. And looked at me and he said, "Right, let's make some fucking music then." And I looked at him. I was like, what? You know, and he said, "Go on, sit in the big chair. you know what you're doing.
Get on with it.
Get on with it. Yeah. And this was, you know, when he was wearing the tartans, he had the orange hair, drinking Red Stripe and all this, you know. So I was just like, this is unbelievable. And I couldn't wait because I had some ideas, you see. So I started doing things. I thought the bass needed to be a lot louder and lower. And, you know,
And what song were you working on?
it was a song that was basically, it was an outtake from Metal Box.
Okay. A great album.
Yeah, great album. And it was came out as a 12-inch sort of one-off release. And I think I might be wrong about this. It might be called Home is Where the Heart Is or something like that.
Anyway, you're in there now.
Yeah, and so anyway, I was doing this, and the engineer comes back, knocks on the door, like,
Can't get in.
let me in. And John goes, it says ignore him. So we carried on, and then the guy phones, and I pick up the phone, and the guy goes, "Hey man, the door's locked. Can you open the door?" And so John goes, "Is that him?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Here, give it here." And he takes the phone, and he says, guy goes, "Hey man, the door's locked. I can't get in." And he says, "Yeah, well, we're making music in here, which is more than you fucking know how to do. So fuck off home." And
That's a big jump right in to the fire. For you, Nick, which was amazing.
Well, it was incredible because, you know, and it wasn't about. I mean, I you know, obviously I finished that record and it did sound good, but a lot of it was just me and John just got on really well. You know, I just got on really well with him, and I still to this day, you know, he's where we see each other whenever we can, and it was obviously just one of those things where, you know, somehow I clicked with him, and
because as you know, and as a lot of musicians know, in like mainstream studios, engineers, producers can be fucking cunts, and that's not what a musician wants. And if they find somebody they can relate to, that's what they want.
Yeah.
So who came calling next? Now, all right, you did that. You must be in amazement. And
well, that was just that one song. But then what happened was a few, like a week or two later, they booked studio time to do their next album, which was The Flowers of Romance. So I got asked to do that, and you know, that worked really worked out.
That's just you know, a classic and magnificent piece of work. That album.
Thank you.
It's stellar. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, when I listen to that record, there's so many things about it that are, you know, that album could have only have happened because I didn't know what I was doing, but I wanted to try so many things. I mean, the sounds are so over the top and experimental. And they let you. Yeah, and they wanted me to. In fact, Keith asked me, basically, Keith Levine told me that I was part of Public Image, that I joined the band because they were like, "There's no way we can make this sound like this live."
And by the way, let's just give praise to Keith Levine for a minute, because so underrated, so underused, and so underaccomplished. Really a deficit to the world of music because of whatever his personal issues were. Just, I did not do enough, but what he did do was so monumental.
Yeah. I mean, I love Keith. He was great. I spoke to him actually last year for quite a bit, and he sent me a whole bunch of songs, and so we kept in touch as well. Yeah, I mean, it was that album. It's, you know, the other factor to that album for those interested is that John had been in Ireland and got into a fight in a pub.
I think I heard about this.
Yeah, and he was arrested and went to jail. I mean, I think someone picked on him because of his looks, you know, with the orange hair and all that. And anyway, a fight broke out, and a couple of people got bottled and injured. And he went to jail, and he was allowed out. Or in fact, Richard Branson bailed him out. came back to England, but he was going to go to court, and he was convinced that this was it, that he was going to go to prison in Ireland, and he was going to get killed in prison. So he was super focused about making this record and was there a lot, you know, and he was driving the whole thing. And then you had Martin Atkins, who was just one of the most phenomenal drummers ever, in my opinion. I mean, I just think he's really extraordinary. And he was really young. I mean, I think he was 19 or something. He was very young, maybe 20. Sorry, no, we're the same age. So yeah, we were both 20. Me and him were 20 years old. And we'd get in really early because we were so eager, and both of us could not believe our luck, you know, working with John and Keith. So we got in there, and I got these crazy drum sounds, and he'd play these drums to the drum sounds. And then John would turn up and hear what we'd heard, and he'd very often enter and go, you know, what are you two clowns been up to? And we'd play him what we'd done, and some of the things he didn't like, and that they were never heard again. And then some of them he did like the four enclosed walls, which is basically it's almost just drums and vocal. And then it's got some backwards pianos, and it's got a Mickey Mouse watch that's going that Martin was playing to. John loved that track, you know, loved the beat. And so he wrote those lyrics immediately. Like, he heard it once, played it again. During the second play, he wrote the lyrics on the inside of a cigarette carton. He, you know, just wrote them, and he said, "If you got a mic up, I fancy a whale." And in he went and did 2 takes, and that's it. You know, it's incredible. I mean, that's one of my all-time favorite tracks. It's so unusual. But the whole album,
when you're there in the creative process with other people in the same vibe, in the same energy zone, beauty, genius happens. It just does.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be. It's not a struggle. When it's right, it's not a struggle.
I agree 100%.
You can fight and struggle to make it right too. I mean, I don't think there's just one way.
You know what? I have to say, I have never fought with anyone to make it right, because the people I choose to work with, I know what they're capable of, and I want to promote and progress them further in that vein of what it is that they're so unique in doing. So
yeah,
I've never fought.
I mean, I would agree
with my collaborators
that the best songs, and best records, or you know, tracks are ones that come easy. Like they really are, and they're also, funnily enough, they're also the ones that people gravitate towards and get on first listen, because they're simple.
They write themselves.
And I do think, I mean, I definitely went through a period towards the end of the 80s with huge budgets and spending months and months making these records, and they're awful, most of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not the big successful ones. They're the ones that didn't sell, that people didn't get, because they're just overdone.
No, but Nick, did this spoil you? Because suddenly you're working creatively with the artist, and then suddenly things are selling, your name's getting out there, and then do you hit a wall with an executive saying, "No, you can't do this, you can't do that"? I mean,
wait. Let's hang on. Back up. Public image. Then what? I want all you did so many interesting things in such a short period. We got to get that out here. I mean, this is not a 24-hour. It might have to be a two-parter. So public image. Then what? I mean, no, because the things you were involved in just kept coming, and they were very monumental in that period.
Well, that year was the year after Flowers of Romance was nuts. It was, I mean, even basically what happened then was the first band that got in touch with me was Killing Joke. They were
monumental at that moment as well.
Yeah, and that was their second record called What's This For? So I did that, and that was, I mean, there's all kinds of stories I could tell you about that. That was just crazy.
Tell us a naughty one.
Well, the naughty one would be, let me see now. Well, towards the end of mixing it, when I was mixing it, it was Jazz, the singer's birthday, and a lot of friends turned up to the studio to celebrate, and I was just there trying to concentrate and mix.
You
But
want to finish the shit.
yeah, I want to finish it, and they, you know, there was all these crazy looking people. There was a guy called the Wizard who had a tattoo of a spider's web on his face, and he used to go up on stage and throw flames. So he was there. There was a midget or a mini. I think that's politically correct,
Small
right?
person.
A mini person. But
I thought you were going to say a mermaid, but I mean,
well,
that would
there
just
was
be
a
too-
mermaid. There was a
What?
mermaid.
No,
In my
whoa,
mind,
whoa.
there was a mermaid. But there was this mini person, but he was dressed like straight out of a Dickens novel, and he had a top hat, and his top hat was extremely tall to make up for his shortness.
All right.
And he had a you know, a watch, you know, one of those pocket watches,
watch.
the
Yeah.
whole thing. He had the whole look. He was incredible. And so anyway, a lot of and you know, this was, I don't know, there was quite a lot of gothic looking people, although the term goth hadn't really happened yet, because we're
Right.
talking 1981, you know, that it wasn't like that. These were basically punks who were wearing black, were coming in. And so it was like that. And then someone bought a cake, and Geordie, being the prankster came up and said, "Here, Nick, do you want a piece of chocolate cake?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love some." He said, "Do you want a small piece or a big piece?" I said, "A big piece." I started eating this chocolate cake. And within, I would say, probably 20 minutes, I was like, the knobs were like turned into snakes. I was looking at the speaker, and the speaker was attacking me. And I remember like thinking, what the hell is going on? Everything that was supposed to be static was moving, and things were turning into animals. And I turned, and I heard all this laughter behind me, and this voice just went, you know, "Are you all right, Nick?" And of course it went, "Are you all right, Nick? You're all right." So I swiveled around on my swivel chair, and the whole room just span out of control. And I realized, you know, the thing is, I thought that they'd put something in my drink because they were pranksters like that. And so I had some more cake.
Oh no.
Anyway, in the end, I ended up leaving. I thought, I can't work under these circumstances.
You can barely exist under those circumstances.
Yeah. So I stopped mixing and
went home.
Went for a walk, and lo and behold, I walked down this corridor at the townhouse, which was a long, thin corridor, and I saw Cousin It. And because it was just this hair walking away from me, so I ran after Cousin It, and Cousin It turned around the corner and was gone. Like, oh, now I'm really losing it. Things are disappearing.
So what was it dosed with? Cannabis or LSD or what? Do you know?
I thought it was LSD, but it's possible that it was just hashish, because I think
because it's very strong. I mean, space cakes can be ridiculous. Yeah. Well.
But the next morning it turned out that, well, so I was eating breakfast, I was fine. The next morning, in walks Steve Howe from Yes. With his wife, and his wife had hair all the way down to the ground and looked like
she was it.
So that's what it was. All right.
But yeah, apart from Killing Joke, I end up working.
Apart from I was killing you with some space cakes.
Killing Joke, killing me. There's oh yes, the birthday party. They ended up. Ivo from 4AD called me and said that this band from Australia were in town, had come to London for the first time, and they were refusing to work with anybody except for whoever did the Flowers of Romance. So Ivo got in touch with me. He didn't know my age or anything.
Ivo was always a cool guy, though.
He's very cool.
4AD, yeah.
Yeah. And so that they actually then 4AD were a little label then, and they couldn't afford the Townhouse. Townhouse was quite an expensive studio. So I spoke with the manager, tried to get the price down. She said, "Well, you know, if you come in at midnight and start at midnight and work through the night, then we can give it to you for half price." So I went back to Ivo and he said, you know what, that will work because this band are very nocturnal. And then I remember I was working during the day. I believe I was working as an assistant, because I was still technically an assistant as far as the Townhouse on a Phil Collins session.
God.
I saw that. Face Value, right?
Face Value was a bit before that, but yeah, it was another one. And then I packed up everything, and then, you know, I get this call from the phone. I pick up the phone and they go, "Here, Nick, can you come up to reception? There's one of your bands are here and they're scaring everyone. Can you come and get them?" So I walked up there. Obviously, I've no idea what the birthday party looks like, and
Or sounds like at that
four,
point.
four guys in suits and crazy hair and they look like vampires, you know, and they really did look like vampires. And it was extraordinary. And then, you know, so we started at midnight and the song was called Release the Bats. So
So,
yeah,
all right. Well,
makes a lot of sense.
all right. So the question I was asking earlier, so you're people are particularly the artists, are seeking you out as your reputation starts painting a nice view of what you can be and how easy you are to work with. You know, I believe it's very believable getting to know you. When or have executives try to breathe down your throat and actually try to pull?
I was very lucky. That didn't really happen.
Okay.
It didn't really happen. I mean, I really was very lucky in that way, because all the bands I worked with were because the bands wanted to work with me and found me. So I never had to go and find work, and I didn't ever have to go to a meeting at a record company. I didn't have to do all that. I sort of bypassed it, I guess. I was very, very fortunate because, I mean, what happened with after Flowers of Romance came out, I mean, there was no credits. If you look on that record, there's no credits, right, for anybody. But what happened is John was interviewed in the NME and Sounds and all that. And because the record was so weird sounding, they asked who produced it. And he said, "Oh, it's this young bloke called Nick Launay did it." And that's how Killing Joke found out. And that's how it sort of snowballed. And then a Gang of Four, I got to work with the Gang of Four, and also Kate Bush happened that year. So in 1981, I worked with pretty much all these great bands. I mean, it was just crazy. I was still living at home with my mum. so
did Kate Bush have her Fairlight yet? I mean, like, were
Yes.
you're dealing with like splicing and doing the old fashioned way, and then this machine comes in, and I guess you just kind of roll with it, or did you still?
Well, the Fairlight you couldn't record a whole song into Fairlight. All you could do, it could only sample, God, not even a second. You know, it was really short.
I didn't realize
and you could just play. All you could do is it was the first sampler, so you could make a noise, record that into it, and then it would play back, but it would divide it into notes, which was extraordinary at the time.
Yeah, it was.
But so you basically, all it allowed you to do was play on a keyboard the noises that you put into it.
And did it notoriously overheat? I heard some people.
Oh yeah, it was terrible. It was, I mean, not terrible. It was a combination of, like, you know, the modern age has arrived.
Yeah.
Look what this can do. And also, you know, it would take so long to sample a sound. So you'd hit a sound. Like if Kate Bush, if she went like, oh, like that,
yeah,
you'd record that and it would grind away. You know, this
processing
disc would go for like half an hour, and you go, "Oh my God, is this worth it?"
And did Kate Bush come to the table with the sound she wanted, or was she kind of just chipping it away at it? Like,
well, we made up sounds as we went. She had some sounds already, but she basically owned the third one in history. Like, I think Peter Gabriel had probably the first or second.
Okay.
And there was a guy called JJ who is a member of the Art of Noise.
Yep.
So he was the guy who came down and helped you work out how to work it, because it was completely new technology. I mean, it looked like something out of, you know,
Did you work with Ann Dudley? Did you work with Ann Dudley?
Yeah. She's a
Okay.
string arranger.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
she
whole
did
scene.
it.
So Nick, after
Yeah.
you're doing all these incredible, like monumental classic alt bands of that period, what happens? Do you then go on to bigger, better paying, shittier gigs, or what happens?
Oh God.
I
The
gotta
simple
ask.
answer is yes.
Nice.
How
Right?
could you not?
But however, some of those shitty bands weren't that shitty because I was very lucky because I got to be I could choose. And also, I don't think that any of the outright sort of pop bands were interested in someone like me. They didn't want what I did. It was always the sort of, I mean, in Excess were at that point an up and coming Australian pop band, but they were trying to do things that weren't normal as well, and they, and obviously Michael Hutchins was friends with Nick Cave, and he moved in those circles. Although In Excess were more commercial and pop, Michael wasn't. Michael was much sort of down to, you've got going out to crazy clubs at night and stuff like that, and he was very close friends with Nick Cave and a lot of other cool people. I mean, his taste in music was great. One of his favorite bands was the Gang of Four, which is why I got to work with In Excess, was because I worked with the Gang of Four, because both those bands were basically rock bands that were doing funk. They're incorporating funk, and they were kind of influenced by Chic and dance bands. So that's where that whole thing happened.
Well, the new romantic.
When did you decide to go to LA, which is where you are now?
That was much later. I married a wonderful Australian DJ called Nadia Anderson, who's from Melbourne, and she actually went to school with Nick and Mick and all that lot, and they went to what's it called, RMIT, I think it's called, the art college or in Melbourne. Anyway, she was a DJ. When I say DJ, I'm not talking about type DJing. I'm talking about voice. She was a voice on Triple R in the 70s.
A radio DJ.
Radio DJ, yes, like radio DJ, as in announcing songs, and she was probably the first person to play The Birthday Party and The Boys Next Door on radio. She was a very cool person. She came over to England. I met her. We had 2 kids and got married. And so eventually I moved to Australia because Australia was a much better place for kids to grow up.
Yeah.
And by that point, I'd done quite a lot of records. So I lived in Australia for about 10 years, and then I moved to LA in year 2000. And actually, year 2000, things picked up again. I mean, things go in waves. Obviously, when I had kids, I didn't work so much. I took some time off, not a lot, but I took a bit of time off. But when I came to LA, I worked with the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, who are a great band. And I've, recently I've worked with the Idols and Amyl and the Sniffers, or Amyl and the Sniffers, as they call them in America. And so I've continued to work with bands that are alternative, or a lot of these bands now. I mean, the term post-punk, which is what, it was just after punk, is what I did. Yeah. That term is a very current term. Yeah. And so a lot of the post-punk bands, especially English ones, tend to sort of ring me up. So I keep busy. But definitely, like, 1981 was an extraordinary year because I got to work with all those very cool bands from back then. I mean, working with the Birthday Party was crazy. It was very. We only we recorded everything in one night, and then came back the following night at midnight and mixed it. So it was done very quickly.
Like most of my albums.
Yes. No, it's the best way.
You know what you're doing, you just
Yeah.
frickin' do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of it is to do with the people involved. I mean, I ended up back working with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds in year, I think it was 98 or something like that. And we did that Nocturama album in 4 days,
Yeah.
And Dig Lazarus Dig was done in 4 days as well. They're very quick records. And
When you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Meaning recorded in 4 days or recorded and mixed in 4 days?
no, just recorded
Yeah, I was gonna say.
the main
Yeah, yeah,
recording. I mean,
yeah.
maybe it was another couple of days for overdubs,
Right.
but I'm talking 3 days, and then mixing probably took a week.
Now, let me ask you, going back to the Queen story of that first assistant engineer who kind of got up and left, have you ever gotten up and left? Has there ever been a fucking band that you're like, I can't take this anymore? You don't have to answer if it's.
I don't. I mean, no, not really. There was a band I did work with that I've only had really like 1 or 2 bad experiences.
Interesting.
Working with artists.
And that was just like the whole project, or was it actually just the artist and you just not seeing eye to eye?
It's usually a build-up thing. You sort of like, because I'm, I mean, I don't know. I get on with everybody. I don't.
Sure.
I find it very easy to get. I mean, I've worked with a lot of very difficult people, or people who are deemed to be difficult, and for some reason, I don't find it like that. Because I think it's, I think part of it is that I'm not a musician. I think that's a big part of it, because I'm never going to pick up their instrument and tell them how to play their instrument.
Right.
Right. All I'm doing.
I think that's why we got along so well on first meeting, Nick, because I'm not a musician either.
Yeah.
I just use music as a battering ram against the pain.
There you go. There you go.
But you're not.
I mean, I can play stuff. I can play stuff. Don't get me wrong. I could make a record on my own playing all the instruments, but I would play them in a very strange way.
But
the world is waiting.
Yeah, but I'm not. The thing is that what I'm doing with the records I make, or most of them, is I'm really listening to what the band are doing, or what the artist is saying, what their lyrics are doing, and trying to capture that moment that they're in the studio. And I'm trying to capture the rawness and the energy, I suppose, or the angst, or whatever whatever the mood is. I'm trying to capture that with microphones. That's what I'm doing. I'm not really coming at it from a songwriting point of view of trying to change their songs. To me, they've written the songs, and I'm like, well, that bit of your song actually isn't very, very good. I'm very blunt about that kind of stuff, or that bit's too long. And sometimes it will be like the middle section of a song will be the hook, and I'll just go, that should be the chorus. So let's move that. So let's go verse, middle, verse. Swap the chorus and the middle around. And that's worked a couple of times, and people go, oh my God, how did you come up with that idea? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I'm just.
You were listening.
I'm listening as a fan of music, and I know what I have a gut feeling about things, and it's very, very strong. I can listen to a song, one listen, and I can tell you brutally what I think. And sometimes it's not, it's not always what people want to hear, but it's a very definite thing. And I think what happens when you do that is the artist respects what you're saying, because you're being blunt. If you're polite and oh yeah, everything you do is great, well, no, that's not going to work. What use are you if you're not going to criticize and make things better?
The thing is, look, people are calling on you because of what you've done, what you know, what you bring to the table.
Yeah,
that's where they're calling on you specifically. They want your input.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess it is that.
I know so.
And I think the sounds of the records I make they have a distinctive sound, which is what I bring to it, and they, I guess, clearly like that. I mean, certainly in the case of those early bands, it's like they liked, in this case, Flowers of Romance, and they wanted it to sound. I mean, I mean, I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't done that session. I would have gone on a completely different trajectory.
You are kind of going in a little different direction now, which is film score
Yes.
And that is about understanding sounds and accompanying an emotion or a scene or
True.
so can you talk a little bit about your film score adventures?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd always, because to me, songs, the biggest thing about songs is the feeling. I've always said this to bands, even young bands. When I worked with quite a lot of teenage bands, and I get very nervous about going to a studio, and I just goes, look, it isn't. You can fuck up, you can play wrong, it doesn't matter. What's really important is that the feeling of what you play comes out of the speakers. So play it emotionally and play loud bits loud, play quiet bits quiet. Don't try and play it accurately to the beat. Play it as loose as you want, but make sure you get the feeling, because if we don't have the feeling, we haven't got anything. And so I've always approached records that way. And to me, film music, if you watch a film with the sound down, you can't tell what the emotion is sometimes. And then you add the music and suddenly it becomes scary, or it becomes romantic, or it becomes something. And I thought, wouldn't that be fun to do music to picture? And again, another sort of universe luck thing is that I was working with my friend Anna Calvi, who's a great singer-songwriter, English singer-songwriter. I did her last album, which is called Hunter, and we had a lot of fun doing that record. And then she ended up doing the score for season 5 of Peaky Blinders, and was asked back for 6, but the director wanted it to be a bigger sound than, because season 5 is more or less just her and her voice, which is extraordinary and great, but he wanted a bigger thing, so she brought me in. And then a couple of things happened because of COVID, where it got delayed and delayed and delayed. And anyway, by the time it came back to us doing it, she was pregnant and was, had to concentrate on the baby and having birth. And so I ended up finishing it and taking over and finishing it. So I ended up doing, a lot of the score. A lot of it is her music and some of it's my music. So it's a combination of the two. And so that's how I got this lucky break to go into doing film music, and ended up doing the score to Peaky Blinders. So that's opened the door for me to go off and do more. So I'm very excited about that.
And how painstaking was that process? I mean, that's a lot of work.
Very.
Yeah.
It was very painstaking. It was really,
You've had
really
it so easy.
stressful.
You got to torture yourself now at this point, right?
Yeah.
So it's got to be painstaking, because also are you then having to listen to, do you have an overlord going, oh no, not this, that? I mean, the same way that anybody who writes for TV, there's not one person writing, there's so many people writing, and you're up for committee.
That's right. Well, usually you're right. That's exactly how it is. But luckily, again, for me, it was just the director. His name's Anthony Byrne. And again, it was because of COVID. COVID, it took longer to film it, so the deadline was incredibly harsh. I mean, as soon as I started, when I kind of took over and started doing the music for it, it was like I had to deliver 1 cue a day. It was, and there were 70 cues.
Ow.
So it was months. It was months of no doing anything, no social life, no nothing.
Surprised you have any hair left, Nick.
I know. Well, it's all smoke and mirrors, actually.
It was such a pleasure meeting you, and
Thank you.
I'm so happy with the trajectory of your career, because, look, who we love to feature on the Lydian Spin are the stubborn, the resistors, the not going away, those that can continually morph, do what they want, and and get away with it.
Yes,
that's why
especially get away with it.
So happy to have you on this, and I was
Thank you.
so happy to meet you, because you were having a rough day, and for some reason I'm like, my job is going to be to cheer that man up.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And I did it.
You did, yeah.
I
did. It was great. It was so good hanging
I'm
out.
like, oh
with
my
you.
God, he's having a really bad day. I wanted to meet, and then like, we met outside of Jumbo's Clown Room. I'm like, no, no.
Of course.
My job is to cheer.
We had
is
to meet at Jumbo's. That's the place to meet.
My next event in LA is going to be the Gals of Jumbo's Clown Room. Just saying.
Fantastic. No, it was great because we got to spend it felt like a whole week together, just going to
Right.
all these different events, and it was so wonderful. I mean, that whole performance at Zebulon.
Badass Babes of Burlesque,
Oh,
Fish
yes.
in the Blues,
Incredible.
Tim Dahl, Joseph Keckler, Sylvia Black, Greg Foreman. The family was in the house and we were having a good time.
Yes.
And your party was fabulous. We had a
Oh,
great time.
thank you. Yeah, that's right. You timed it well, actually. That week was extraordinary.
No,
That was a great fun week.
Totally.
Well,
And
prepare.
Rita, lovely Rita.
Oh yes, of course.
Yes.
We'll be back,
Yes.
and we will be back in the saddle, and I'll be the one sitting on your lap next time, not
Nice.
Freddie Mercury. I'm here. He's not. I don't wear
Yes.
fur coats. He did. I don't sing in falsetto. I got a baritone, but I'm as queer as they come. This is the Lydian Spin. And thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, pleasure, Nick. Really.